All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Melissa Davis, and I'm the Senior Marketing Officer for Alcohol Beverage Services. And I want to thank you for joining us for the second of 3 seminars celebrating Bourbon Heritage Month. So that is correct. We have an entire month in our world dedicated to bourbon. And then let's see, we still have some people joining, getting settled, pouring themselves a little barrel, just like I did. So in the interim, just a couple of quick reminders. Let's see, recording of the session has begun, and I'll be posting the video to our website for those that couldn't join us live tonight. And then also, because we're expecting a relatively large group, everyone's line is going to be muted. So we're going to use the chat box for questions. And then last but not least, be sure to follow ABS on Facebook and Twitter. Our handle on Facebook is at ABS Montgomery County, and on Twitter it's at ABS MoCo. Or sign up for our weekly e-newsletters that I know most of you all are on for sales and specials, lottery details, product releases, and community news. And just so you all know, there is a lottery that is starting on Sunday. So let's see, it looks like we've got a decent core group here. I'm still admitting some folks as we go, but why don't we go ahead and get started? Our seminar this evening is with Barrell Craft Spirits. And we've got 2 great partners that are going to spend some time with us this evening. So Eva Mulchy, she's the brand development manager for Barrell. She's going to lead our seminar this evening. So welcome, Eva. And then we've also got Stacy Weigel. She is the Montgomery County Wine and Spirits Coordinator for Prestige LaDroit, who is Barrell's local distributor. And Stacy's going to help me do some of that question answering this evening. So thank you both for your partnership. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it on over to Eva.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I see there's 22-ish people. I'm sure they'll kind of trickle in as the minutes go by, but thank you for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. I'm joined by a couple of coworkers actually as well. On this call is Stephanie Bear. She is our brand development manager for the Midwest, those states that don't really touch an ocean. There's a lot of them. And she does some work on the West Coast as well, but she's based in Denver. There's also Will Schragus on this call. He's our national sales director, so he kind of covers everything that we definitely don't cover in the interim when it comes to our sales team. He's also the person that kind of makes all the magic happen logistically. And then I am based in Westchester County. I live in New York, right outside New York City. I cover South Carolina all the way up to Maine. So I've been with Barrell for just about 2 years. And if you've gotten, this far through the quarantine without spending 40 hours on Zoom, congratulations. Although I'm sitting here wondering why I haven't invested some stock into Zoom yet. So I think I should probably get on that as time goes by and as I keep doing these. But yeah, so I work for Barrell Craft Spirits. I'll talk about the background of the company, who we are, what we do, and then I'll bring you guys through kind of a sensory analysis of batch 24, batch 25, what I'm tasting and smelling for both batches. I like this to be as conversational as possible. So please reach out with any questions in the chat. You can raise your hand or use the chat feature. I definitely think that tasting and smelling things, just, spirits in general, same with wine, it's very subjective. I think that what I'm smelling and tasting, a lot of it goes back to kind of nostalgic times where you're smelling certain things that remind you of certain periods in your life or certain people. For example, whenever I smell something that's, is close to like Johnny Black, for example, I automatically think of my grandparents, which just, they drank a lot of when I was growing up. So it's definitely subjective and, nostalgic a lot of the times. So yeah, all right, so let's get started. So who here has any barrel in front of them that they're ready to taste? I know that batch 25 is something that we'll be talking about tonight, but it's not something that was in stock at the right time. I think it's just getting inbounded in Montgomery County as we speak, which is actually a good problem. But for those of you that don't have it, we'll definitely end this call and Melissa will explain where to, all of the stores should be getting it in any day now. But I'm really excited to talk about both batches, batch 24 and batch 25. For those of you that don't know the company, we were actually founded in 2013. It was founded by a man named Joe Beatrice. He's the owner and founder, and he lived right by me in New York in Westchester County with his family. And he was visiting a distillery in Kentucky in 2012, Thanksgiving. And that's kind of when the conceptual part of the execution when it comes to this company kind of came to fruition. He realized that this was the perfect time in his life to do this, and he really wanted his own company. I also think that there was a point in this industry where kind of a lot of people were looking for higher end brands, and there weren't a ton that were saturating the market. And so since day one, it's always been, it started off as kind of a one-man show. It was just Joe when he was living in New York. He was just feet on the street, kind of working the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, selling bourbon batch 1, bourbon batch 2, whiskey batch 1. It's funny because I still go into certain stores in Westchester that I haven't been to in a while, and they'll ask for Joe instead of me. But since then, Joe has actually moved to Kentucky. Him and his family kind of uprooted, and they moved to Kentucky a few years ago. And his family also works for the company as well. So his wife works for the company, his daughter works for the company. She's e-commerce graphic designer. And we went from a one-man show to this team of, I want to say about 15 to 20 people now. Will, who's on this call, he's the national director. He's been with the company. I think he was employee number 2 since Joe technically was employee number 1. I don't know if it was Trip or Will. Trip's our master blender, but I always go back and forth in my mind who was actually the first hire. Will, I'm sure that you can shed some light on that whenever you want in the chat. But so yeah, Will came on board 4 or 5 years ago, and he kind of brought all of the work that Joe did from day one, and he kind of broadened our footprint. And so we went from 4 states to 46 states, and we've just been growing a ton over the past couple of years. Stephanie actually, although she's based in Denver, she worked in New York, and she worked for Barrell a few years ago part-time. So she kind of left, worked for a larger company, then came back on board. We also have someone that we just hired in Florida who's going to cover the Southeast. We have someone based in Texas. Her name is Jessica. And so we're kind of slowly growing this sales team, which is really fun. And also, I think what's important to note about the products that you're going to be tasting tonight is that everything is cask strength. So make sure that you have a glass of water or a water droplet or any sort of thing to kind of taste the products a little bit differently than just neat. Everything is subjective, as I've said numerous times, but I like to always add 1 or 2 drops of water with everything just to see how everything changes. All right, so let's see. Let's start with batch 24. So who here has batch 24? All right, perfect. Great. All right, so batch 24, I believe that we released batch 24, I'm gonna say about 4 or 5 months ago. It came to market when everyone was still kind of hunkering down and trying to figure out how the pandemic was working, not working. We were all on Zoom all the time. And so it was kind of strange to release a product, in this pandemic, but it was received really well that it kind of came and went very quickly. Batch 24 was also a high rye blend that, although it's very versatile and unique compared to previous batches, it's something that we really haven't done conceptually since batch 6 of the bourbon, which I believe was 4 or 5 years ago, which was a while ago. So we never try to repeat the same, project. Everything that we always do is going to be different. Everything that we make and blend is finite. So there is always a limited number of bottles when it comes to buying our product, especially with our batches. When we make the batches, the way that it works is, we get all of our ingredients and we create a concept, and then we start with smaller scaling. And then once we start scaling up into 53 gallons increments, we put everything into our 6,000 gallon tanks, which I'll actually show you guys, because I think it's very important to kind of visualize what everything looks like in our facility. So these are our 6,000 gallon custom Vendome tanks that were made for us in Kentucky. We're based in Louisville. So they were delivered and installed, I believe, in the fall of last year. And that's, I think, batch 22 or 23 is when we really started to use these. They have extremely big agitators in there that agitate the whiskey. We let everything sit before we taste everything, but they definitely have helped in terms of turnover when it comes to our batches of bourbon. This is also a good image just to kind of get a feel. If you look back on this image, you'll see this, this area here that actually lifts up, and then that's the area that we dump all of our barrels into. And so you see all the char coming out of the barrel here into this trough, and then everything is transferred into the tanks. And then just to give you guys a little peek at how our lab works. So this is how the batches kind of start. We always want to start in kind of this scale up testing process, so to speak. So we always start very small, just a couple of ounces of certain ingredients, and then we scale up by ounce. And then once we're up to about 750 mLs, then we go from bottle to bottle, and then we go up to gallons. And then once we're at gallons, that's when I think the precision blending really gets important, because when you're blending something that's, you know, was a teaspoon of something that changed the compound into 5 ounces, I think when you're talking about 53-gallon barrels and multiples of them, it's important to know that every time we add a barrel, we always want to make sure that we're not completely changing the compound of the blend. So we always start from, you know, a very small scale, and then we build up. And then that's Joe. He's our owner, founder. Trip is actually, I'll show you. So this is Trip. Trip is our master blender. I think he was employee number 2 or 3 whenever Will came on board. He was a biochemist at Brown-Forman for a very long time. So he is kind of the brains behind science and molecular, all of that. He can talk about esters and yeast strains and temperature and water and all of that. So I think with Joe's palate and Trip's science knowledge, I think it's, you know, they're definitely a good duo. So I always like to start by smelling my spirits before I taste them. I think that, as I said before, everything is subjective, but what I'm tasting and smelling is certainly not what you should be tasting and smelling. So pour yourself some batch 24 if you haven't already.
We have a question from George about the tanks, and he wants to know if you use them to blend in the 15-year to batch 23.
Let's see, so to blend in the 15-year in batch 23. So I do believe that batch 23 was after we got the Vendome tanks. So everything that we blend is in those tanks for our batches. So yes, some 15-year-old went into batch 23, and that was all added to the Vendome tanks. I hope that answers this question. Okay, good. All right, so if you haven't poured some batch 24, I would pour that right now. And I always like to make sure that instead of just putting your nose directly into something, especially when it's cask strength, try smelling something about 6 to 8 inches away from your nose before you just put it directly in and burn your nostrils. So, you know, take a little waft of the whiskey in whatever glass that you're using. I would start about 6 inches away and then kind of work a little bit closer to your nose so that you're not burning anything. I think on the nose, what really appeals to me right off the bat is there's very little to no alcohol, even right up close. I think that what I personally get out of this is like a lot of sweet notes. So you're getting like the molasses and dark honey, almost like when you're at a cocktail bar and you order a really good old fashioned, like a bourbon old fashioned or a rye old fashioned. And instead of just a sugar cube, they're using a certain type of sugar where it's like molasses or honey sugar or liquid sugar. I'm getting a lot of that on the nose, which is interesting because it's important to note that these are blends of high rye bourbons. So there's 9, 13, and 15-year-old bourbons in here from Indiana, Tennessee, and Kentucky. I think it's easy to, you know, smell something and say, oh, I smell cinnamon, I smell clove, I smell nutmeg. Those are easy when it comes to your spice box knowledge. Us as a company within the company of Barrell, we've definitely learned over the past couple of months, especially in quarantine because we're not together, is what exactly are you tasting and smelling and why? I'll show you guys this tasting grid that I have that we've been kind of integrating into our process every time we get something in the mail. Every time that we have a new product, we always like to taste something together and use this. Here we go. This tasting grid. So this is something that Will actually created, and I think it's really interesting when you're talking about what you're smelling, because like I said, you can easily smell cardamom, cinnamon, clove, nutmeg. Those are easy when it comes to your spice box knowledge. I think this tasting grid really forces you to think outside the box. Instead of, just cardamom, what kind of spices are you getting? Are you getting the spices that you typically get when you order Indian food, like coriander? For non-organic notes, let me bring up, I actually have the tasting grid of batch 24 from, I believe, Will. Yes. Okay, so let me share this with you guys. And this will give you guys a good idea of certain things when you don't think about, what a non-organic note is. Hot tar is not something that we necessarily beeline for when we're smelling something. But I think when you really spend some time with the spirit and you smell it and taste it and you get to know it and you just start thinking about nostalgic different periods of your life and people that you've been around, I think that's when you start branching out on what kind of stone fruits you're getting, what kind of lemon are you getting, what kind of sugar. And I think that will resonate with you a little bit more once you're understanding what you're smelling and tasting. And I think that's when you really hone in on something, if you like it or not. As I said, this is very subjective. So I think that tasting something and smelling something that you like for your palate is really important. And getting to know all of these tasting notes is just as important, I think. All right, so if you haven't taken a sip yet, this is probably the time to take your first sip after you've nosed everything. And as I've shown on the tasting grid, it's really important when you're tasting something to separate it from the front, mid, and the finish. I think people always kind of look for that spirit that is extremely finish centric, if that makes sense, where it kind of lingers and hangs out in your palate, but that is subjective to everyone. I think with this specific batch, the nose is very similar and reminiscent of like the front and mid palate. And then I think on the finish, it kind of dries out into this like very peppery, very spicy note. And the high rye like really comes in for me on the finish. I'd love to hear what everyone else is getting. Lunchbox plastic. I think with this blend, what also makes it really special is that we have found, since we're a merchant blending company, we definitely find like the secret sauce when it comes to blending, and that specific age of certain bourbons and whiskeys in general that are so fruit forward and just juicy, and they can completely change a blend for the better. And in this blend, it was 15, a little bit of 16-year-old bourbon blends that we've added before we added to the rest of the blend. And that's kind of our secret sauce when it comes to what changes the compound of specific blends and why. So I think with high ryes, there's a lot out there that are astringent and tannic and just very abrasive up front and on the finish. But I think with batch 24, the proof, I think, is perfect for the high rye. I think in general, people that don't necessarily have an advanced palate and don't drink a lot of cask strength spirits, I think that people associate rye with alcohol and astringency because it can be abrasive, it's very loud and aggressive. and it hits everyone's palate a little bit differently. But once you educate everyone, then you know that it's not necessarily just the rye, but I think the alcohol is very subdued here, and it kind of keeps you coming back for more. There's just the right amount of spice. I'm loud and aggressive too. Yeah, so MGP 95 rye, I'm not going to sit here and knock it because I am very partial to MGP rye. I think it's delicious. We actually do have some Indiana rye single barrels that we offer in our single barrel program that have just been selling very well for me in the Northeast. But I do think that you're right, that when there's a lot of ryes out there that are coming from Indiana and they're all 95 rye, it's very abrasive up front. And it does scare a lot of people off. I also think that rye as a category, I know we're talking about bourbon, but rye as a category, it just didn't kind of make that comeback to the alcohol industry that bourbon did after Prohibition. So I think rye is about to have its moment, kind of like bourbon has had its moment for a long time. But I digress. So what does everyone think of batch 24? I hope that everyone likes it. But this is something that we were really excited about. I think this is like also the perfect kind of cocktail bourbon where it's the right proof, it's the right amount of zinginess, where it's not too corn forward, it's not too rye forward. I think it's a good mix. Yeah, it's delicious. Does anyone have any questions about batch 24? If so, use now or forever hold your peace. Is that the term? All right, so if no one has any questions, I can move on to, I know that someone was asking about dovetail, which I'm happy to talk about. I'd love to move on to batch 25, and then we can kind of answer questions about the rest of the line, if that's okay. So yeah, finish up all the batch 24 that you have, and let's move on to batch number 25, which we're really excited to talk about. We as in me. All right, so batch 25, as I said, is getting into the Montgomery stores as we speak. There was just a little bit of delay, and that's for very good reason. All right, so if you haven't poured batch 25, this is the time. All right, so batch 25 is very similar proof, 113, just as batch 24 was. We released batch 25 September of this year, and we're really excited about it. This is actually the first time that we have integrated a 4-grain component into our batches and into our company as a whole. We've never done anything with wheated bourbon, and we felt like this was the right time. I know that we had been talking about it for a very long time. There's always a buzz going around that category in general, but I just don't think that we found the right ingredients to fit the quality of what we do. And we started blending in the summertime, and this is a blend of 5, 7, 9, 13, and 15-year-old bourbons from Indiana, Tennessee, and Kentucky. And there's a lot of layers to this, which I'll explain. So it's not all 4-grain. There's, let's see, the 13 and 15-year-olds in this component are very corn-forward bourbons. There's also some 9-year-old high rye bourbons that we integrated into this blend too, which I think kind of throws everyone for a wrench for the best. And then the wheated is the 5 and 7-year-old component. Now, it's not all wheated. I think there's only about 15 or 20% volume of 4-grain in this, but I think when you explain the fact of the layers when it comes to this batch, people get really excited about it because wheated, as I said, there's a buzzword. People love talking about 4 grains, but there's also corn forward, and then there's high rye. So there's a lot that came to executing this blend in the right way. So if you haven't poured batch 25, this is the time. And if you have it, that's great. But if not, you definitely can get it at the Montgomery stores later this week.
So while Eva is nosing, just want to let you all know, actually batch 25 is in our warehouse at Montgomery County. And so it's going to start going out to stores starting tomorrow. So I would definitely say by this time next week, it will be in all of our stores. But if you're looking over the weekend, check out our search portal. I'll send you the link, but you'll start to see it over the next couple days.
All right.
We have a question about mash bill of the wheaters used for batch 25. Can you break down the mash bill a little more?
So it's a little tough when people ask us specific mash bills of our batches. One, because everything is a blend. So, mathematically, and, we don't have a data analyst in our office to kind of break down and divide all of the mashes. When you think about it, we're blending anywhere from 3 to 8 different mashes together. And if we were to sit here and divide something up just to create something, but it doesn't necessarily taste like 8%, by volume wheat. So we just didn't think that that was something that kind of fit our brand ethos, so to speak. Also, I think that everyone in general, when you're drinking a singular grain of whiskey, it's easy to answer that this is 95.5 or 70.25.5 or 78.88. But I think this company, we do a really good job of coming up with that extra tier of quality. And we have a different story than most people. We're a merchant blending company. So I think in general, people are conditioned to ask the questions of char and mash and et cetera. And we kind of throw them for the loop. So Will has his hand up. All right, I just unmuted.
And I'm unmuted. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Every time I come to one of these, I say I'm not going to rain on Eva's parade, and then something comes up and I want to poke my nerdy head into it. Just to answer the question about mash bill calculations, something that I learned early on from Trip, which I had never really thought about in talking about blends, is that when people talk about mash bill percentages, they're talking about percentage of different grains that are used to ferment and then distill, but they don't say whether it's by weight or by volume. And so the same mash bill from different distilleries gives you very different fermentable changes in what is going on in the actual whiskey. And then the next layer of that is when you blend two things with different mash bills together, are you adjusting by alcohol by volume, or are you doing what's called wine gallons, which is just like water gallons? If you're doing wine gallons, which is the most obvious in terms of the way that our brains think about mixing things together, they will actually change at different rates depending on the temperature of the room, because the volume will change differently depending on the alcohol. Similarly, when people think about percentages of things blended together, the assumption that something that is 10 or 15 or 20 or 15% will make up 10 or 15 or 20 or 50% of the flavor is the way that our brains think about it. Whereas most of the most important parts of our blends are the things that are 1% or 2% or 3% or 5% or 13%, because they are there to add an almost unnoticeable level of complexity without changing the actual makeup of the whiskey or flavor profile of the whiskey. And so I just wanted to clarify, not that you said anything wrong, but we have the data to do the different versions of that math if we wanted to, but we could tell 4, 5, 6 different true stories about the breakdown of every blend, depending on how people wanted us to tell it. And so we try to talk about things in amounts of influence they had on the flavor profile. So batch 25, for instance, I think depending on how you calculate it, is somewhere between 10 and 20% wheated bourbon. It is, I would say, not 20% tasting like a wheated bourbon, but it is 100% you can taste the wheated bourbon in it versus anything else we've ever done. And so the way that we decided we have to talk about it is the first bourbon blend we have made that uses a wheated component, and that's a mouthful, but we have no way of being communicating the real story otherwise, because we would say one thing and everyone would take it different ways. But it is a kind of fun experiment to do at home, to like take two things, mix them 50-50, then water one of them down halfway and mix them 50-50 again. And it's a totally different bourbon because you had a different alcohol by volume in one of the ingredients, and it just like changed the way that everything happened. We don't water anything down in our blends, and so like we're stuck with these different alcohols by volume, different mash bills that were calculated in different ways by the distilleries that made them, and it just becomes like a puzzle with no answer. It's like a snake with a lot of tails eating one or all of them at the same time. And so the way that he was talking about it is perfect, but we talk about more, I guess, like influence within how we perceive the blend than actual percentages, if that makes sense. Okay, I'll butt out now.
No, I appreciate your explanation. Thank you for that. We're really excited about batch 25. As I said before, it's something that we've never done before. We've never integrated this ingredient into our blends. And so it came out September 1st, and we sold it to all of our wholesalers within a couple of days, and it's now gone in our distillery. So consumers can still buy it. It will hopefully reach all of the stores nationally in the next couple of weeks, but it's definitely that batch of bourbon that was released in a pandemic, but also sold out I think the fastest since I've been on board with Barrell. So that's also another very interesting fact. I think when people look for specific wheated bourbons, there's some buzzwords that go around. There's biscuit, yeast, very bread forward. And I think people kind of flock towards the wheated profile because, one, it's light and it's just extremely, in my opinion, easy to drink. But I think it's an easy profile. It's very soft, it's not abrasive. And I think that kind of attracts a lot of different palates. And as Will said, there's not a lot of actual wheated bourbons in this blend. It's not all 4 grain. There's 3 different styles of bourbon in here that kind of make it the component that it is. And so it's important to note that it does smell like 10 to 20% of wheated, or 4 grain rather. And it does definitely taste like there's some biscuity, yeasty notes in there, but it's not all just, soft and floral and perfume forward as other blends that are 100% wheated. I also think that batch 25 is a little bit thinner and brighter than a lot of batches that we've done before, but in the best way possible. I think that there are certain batches that we do that are very dark and, loud and nutty and very leather and tobacco centric, that I think this is just something completely outside of the box that we've ever kind of been familiar with. And I'm really excited about it. Does anyone have any questions about batch 25? I see Joe just came on. Hi, Joe. So as Melissa said, this just inbounded into the Montgomery warehouse. It should be going out to all of the stores in the next couple of days, I assume. But I would definitely get your hands on batch 24 and batch 25. If you guys have any questions, please, feel free to use the chat. I know that some people asked a few questions about Dovetail, so we can move on if you'd like. Melissa and Stacy, I don't know if you want to touch on anything before I move on to Dovetail.
No. I would say I'd love for you to talk a little bit about batch 19 when we get there, but folks are really excited about Dovetail, so jump on in.
I was gonna say Dovetail and 19, which I have some 19 here.
Perfect. All right. Okay, so Dovetail was this product that we released right when I started with Barrell. So 2 years ago, we released this product called Dovetail. And it's got a lot of different finishes and components to it, but it was something that we had a finished product for a while, and we could not get the label approved by the TTB. So we changed, we had to pivot a little bit, and we went from Whiskey 6, calling it Dovetail, If anyone here is in the carpentry industry, a dovetail joint is something that you use a lot when you're looking to put two different pieces of wood together, and it's kind of like a seamless joint, and that's essentially what dovetail is, the whiskey. So it's kind of this like joint of whiskeys and finishes. So for those of you that don't know, Dunn is an amazing winery out of California that Will had a relationship with a couple of years ago. And we have this relationship with Dunn where we send them dovetail and they send us Dunn Howell Mountain barrels. And so we finish Indiana whiskey in the Dunn barrels. And then we have Tennessee bourbon that we split in half, and we finish in rum barrels and port pipes. And then everything is vatted together, and then everything is bottled at cask strength. So since we've released Dovetail 2 years ago, we've done 5 different bottlings of it. It's always going to be the same base, the same finishes. The proof does vary a little bit. It's usually anywhere from 122 to 125 proof, but it's climbing up to be that #1 selling SKU within our portfolio. And Dovetail, I don't know if we ever had these plans to have Dovetail in our core line for a very long period of time, but Dovetail sold out immediately when we got it a couple of years ago. And then there was this kind of moment where we were out of stock on it for a little bit. And then we got more rum barrels, we got more Dunn, and we released it again. And it's just been doing very, very well for us. I like to compare Dovetail to like that gateway whiskey. If someone kind of comes into your store or bar and is not necessarily ready for something cask strength, I think that there's something about Dovetail that's so beautiful and welcoming, that it appeals to so many different types of palates. Cask strength can definitely be daunting when you're looking at it on the shelf or at a bar, but the finishes really bring out the quality of the whiskey here. And I think you get a lot of rum, you get a lot of port. With each release, it's a tiny bit different in taste profile. I actually don't have a bottle near me, but we have little Dovetail joints on the actual label. Let me see if I have all of those bottles behind me, no Dovetail. So I'll try to find a bottle before the end of this tasting so that I can show you guys. But usually on the labels, we do have 2 separate colors for almost all of our labels. And then in between the separation, oh, there's Joe. So in between the separation of the navy and the tan, you'll see little Dovetail joints. And that's exactly what that product is. So I hope that answers all of your questions about Dovetail. It's something that we're really proud of. I love selling it. I know everyone else in the company loves selling it. It's been this part of the core line that's always not a sleeper. Like I said, this is our top selling SKU besides our bourbon batches. So this is the whiskey that I think to buy for those palates that aren't necessarily ready for cask strength. Let's see. Just kind of going through and seeing if there's any questions. Does that answer everyone's questions about Dovetail? I hope so. Let me go all the way back. Okay. All right. So yeah, if there's no other questions about Dovetail, we can certainly move on to something else. I know, Melissa, you said that there's a little bit of batch 19.
There is indeed, and I have not tried it yet. So I am super interested in your thoughts. Sort of taste profile, how does it compare to the 24 and 25? Mm-hmm. But yeah, we still have some, and I think I remember double gold San Francisco somewhere in there.
Yeah, it won double gold. So there are very few, international competitions, national competitions that we really pay attention to. And I think the San Francisco Spirits competition, it was something that we always wanted to pay close attention to, and we always send all of our batches to. And luckily, it's always worked out in our favor. Batch 18, batch 21 have won double gold, and kind of they won the entire small batch bourbon category for, I want to say, the entire year of 2018. People had been talking about batch 18 and the availability, and we had sold out of it almost at the end of where the results came out. And so there was a period of time where all of our wholesalers and all of our really large accounts were asking us for more batch 18, and we just didn't have any to give to them. But luckily, 3 batches later is when batch 21 won the category as well. So we've been really lucky with, winning double gold like batch 19. Dovetail also got a lot of press recently, which we're really excited about. So yeah, batch 19, I want to say that we released batch 19 close to a year ago. It's a blend of Tennessee and Kentucky. There's 9.5 to 14-year-old bourbons in there. It got a 91 on Whiskey Advocate, as you said, double gold San Francisco. Ultimate Spirits Challenge as well was the finalist. I want to say that batch 19 came out right before the summer hit in 2019, so last year. I remember that, selling brown spirits in the midst of 100-degree summer is always fun, but I know that batch 19 was released right before those very hot months. And I remember that batch 19, it's funny because when you talk about all the products within our company, we have 25 batches of bourbon. We have 3 different releases of Barrell Craft Spirits 15-year bourbon. We have so many single barrels. We've probably done 500 to 600 single barrels in the last couple of years. We have rum blends, we have whiskey blends. We're about to come out with bourbon private release, which I'll get to. But it's funny, when you think about something that was released 12 to 16 months ago, there's always this moment where it's tough to kind of hone in on what you're exactly supposed to remember in terms of tasting notes and everything. But I do remember that batch 19 was very like cherry wood, and I got this like almost cherry wood smoked note to it that kind of a lot of people were asking. I remember bringing it out in New York one day to like 4 or 5 different accounts, and I want to say that 3 out of those 5 accounts asked if there was cherry wood in the finishes or in the agings, or did we, vat and then finish in cherry wood. And so there was a lot of questions about that, which I thought was really interesting. And that always kind of resonated with me when talking about the batches. Also, I know Will wants to touch on the different styles of blending. We have a couple different styles. We have likeness blends, we have contrast blending, and our newest concept is the 5 points blending. So I think that this was one of our first batches that we did the 5 points, if I'm correct, Will? Yeah, do you want to touch on that at all?
Sure. Yeah, I'm unmuted. I can do it. I can unmute myself in this Zoom. That's great. So if you care to get into the nitty gritty and follow our company, we have 3 different methods to construct blends. Some of the not bourbon categories are always one of the methods, but within the bourbon category, we sort of have 3 different ways that we start and then continue to get to the final product that we want. The first, which is how we really started and how the majority of our blends are still put together, we call contrast blending, which is when we have a set of barrels that are all very similar, come from a similar place, similar age, similar rick house, usually similar or the same mash bill, similar flavor profiles, and we vat them, and they usually make up 70 to 80% of the blend. Everything else is in a very small amount in contrast to that, to sort of fold in complexity or to push the blend slightly in one way or another to get it to where we think it's the best thing we can make at that moment. Batch 18, contrast blend. Mostly sort of old oaky barrels with other things contrasted in. Batch 24, contrast blend. The base of it is that high rye 9-year-old, and then everything else is in contrast to that. The second, which we do much less frequently because it takes sort of a year of collecting barrels, but if Joe is still on, I know that a lot of his favorite batches are likeness batches that we do. And they also, not by definition, but just by weird circumstance, often happen to be some of the lower age statement batches. And that is when we kind of collect barrels that all have one thing in common with each other, even though the barrels are very different, so that when we finally construct a blend, the highlight is something that was not the leading flavor component to any of those barrels. It's that it becomes really apparent as you put them all together. that all of the other things about the barrels fall away a little bit, and you wind up with batch 11 is a good example, was this like very lemony note, this very like restrained bourbon that we liked. And we spent a year collecting these really restrained, less oaky bourbons, and they were young and they were old, but it showed if we had put even a barrel or two of really oaky bourbon in that, it would have ruined that flavor profile. And so I'm trying to think of what the most recent likeness blend was. What was the really fruit forward chewy one recently? 23 was it? I believe was a likeness blend that was like really orangey and chewy. The last one is 5 Points Method, which actually started with whiskey number 5, the last whiskey we did before Dovetail, where we blend 5-ish, sometimes 4, sometimes 6, sometimes 7 components to push them totally out of balance in one direction so that we can then blend those components back together. And the idea is that you can't really think about what 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 barrels are all doing to each other in a blend. You can only think about what the barrel you're putting in is doing to the blend that exists. But when you're thinking about 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 components, you can think about the way that it's kind of reaching out to all of the other components at the same time. Sort of like the graphs where they like look like a star, but you can kind of drag everything in one way and see the way that everything changes. I think they're called gravity graphs, maybe two-dimensional gravity graphs. Batch 25 was very much a 5 Points blend because there were just so many different things in it. Batch 19, kind of under the radar, was a 5 Points blend as well, that we had this like extremely tannic oak-driven set of barrels that were out of balance. They weren't like good bourbon by themselves. They were just really good at blending backbone into something that had a good flavor profile but needed a little oomph. We had some older, lower proof Tennessee, like 14 and 15-year-old barrels that we've used that same vatting in a lot of ingredients. We now, every time we have these like delicious, but maybe a little too easy to drink older Tennessee bourbons, we vat them. We call it the secret sauce now. And we use them as ways of like separating other flavor profiles that need a little space between when they want to talk within the same bourbon. So 19 got all these accolades, I think, because if you like oaky bourbon and you think about oak when you drink it, it tastes oaky. And if you like really fruity bourbon and you think about fruit when you drink it, it tastes really fruity. And it's because there's a component that makes up 15 to 20% of it that was pushed so far in that direction. So I think it was like the really oaky set, the really fruit forward set, the low proof old set, the extremely spice driven set, and then we had the slightly younger, like really sweet, like lots of barrel sweetness set. And we kind of made them all first and then brought them together. The issue with 5 Points blending is it's the labor of making 6 batches for one batch, because you have to do it 5 times and then you have to blend them together. And that takes time, and it also takes tank space. And so we have to like use one of our blending tanks to get it the way we want, move it out, use our blending tank, get it the way we want. And it just, it monopolizes the entire facility while we're working on it. So it's not that we don't do it, it's that we can only really work on one 5 Points project at a time. The BCS bourbon is a 5 Points project. Dovetail's a 3 Points project, but it's kind of the same method. And so they just don't always come out. But if you really get into following our brand, and you know me or Eva or Stephanie or Jessica, who I think is hiding in here too, or now Matt, who's in this chat, and you want the shorthand, we'll say like, oh yeah, there's a contrast blend. And then like, actually that means a lot about the way that we made it, which is cool. But it's never part of the branding because it's, again, very nerdy. Anyway, thank you, Eva. Sorry to interrupt again.
No. You're complimenting, if anything. You're bringing the right amount of nerd to my explanations. All right, so we've gone through batch 24, the background of the company, batch 25, which I said that is being released to the ABC stores, or ABS, sorry, stores this week. Talked about Dovetail a little bit. If you guys want, I'll touch on some things that are coming out for the rest of the year that we're really excited about. Let me share this label with you guys. So this is a product that kind of had the product for a while, and naming it, I know, was pretty difficult for Joe, but we finally kind of came to this conclusion of what it is and how we're releasing it, and we're really excited about it. So Armida is something that we are coming out with in the next couple of, I want to say In the next 30 days, hopefully, it will be in all of our wholesalers' warehouses. I hope that I'm correct on that. Armida is actually the name of Joe, our owner's mother. So this is going to be a blend of bourbons finished in pear brandy casks, Sicilian Amaro casks, and Jamaican rum casks. So kind of like with Dovetail, how it's finished in 3 different casks and then blended together and then bottled. This will be a very similar product. We are going to release it just like Dovetail a couple of years ago, where it was very limited at first, and then hopefully integrate it into our core line. I know that before Armida was the name of the product, we had all tasted it in Kentucky before COVID, and I don't know if Stephanie or Will can attest to this, but I was so excited about this product, and just like Dovetail, this is going to be such a great addition to our line. And also, who doesn't want to taste a pear brandy, Jamaican rum, and Sicilian Amaro finished blend of bourbon? Yeah, so this is, we're really, really excited about it. Also, we are just releasing, as of a couple of days ago, all of our wholesalers throughout the country should have gotten the new Barrell Craft Spirits 15-year bourbon. So this is our 3rd release of bourbons. It's 15 to 17 years old, from Tennessee, Indiana, and Kentucky. It's got a gray label. It's actually not this one. This is last year's, but this is the label. And it comes in a black box. So this is the 3rd time that we've actually released this, and it's being released as I speak. We're really excited about this year's release. We've kind of come to this point in our company where we're getting better at releasing things, especially when the holiday season is upon us. And this year we released it a little bit earlier so that all of the consumers can get their hands on it. We also blended a little bit more, so there's more to go around. So Armida, the BCS bourbon, we've also blended BCS rum, which is a blend of 14 to 21-year-old rums from Guyana, Barbados, and Jamaica. That's our 2nd release of the BCS rum, so we're also really excited about that. Batch 26, after batch 25, will be coming out in the next few months. I want to say November or December, maybe, is when batch 26 will be hitting all of the stores nationally. Also, whiskey private release is something that here, let me grab. So we released recently. This is kind of an extension of our single barrel program. Whiskey private release is something that we came out with in February, and we hosted an event in Kentucky right before the shutdown, and we had whiskey single barrels of 18-year-old Kentucky whiskey, and then we had whiskey private release. And the private releases have various finishes, ranging from PX sherry to Ratafia de Champagne to cognac to Calvados to Armagnac to Jamaican rum. So it definitely varies from, the finishes that you see versus the finishes that you don't really see often. And so these are being sold as kind of private store picks, and we're also splitting some up nationally. So these have done so well that we've done 2 different releases. We're actually releasing the 3rd 48 set series as we speak now, and we're working on the 4th series. So whiskey private release is something that I think we all realized in a matter of 5 minutes that we all need a lot more to sell within our markets, and people want finished things. I think that 18-year-old, Kentucky whiskey, we rounded out with a little bit of bourbon and rye as well. So they're almost micro blends. And then we finish everything in various casks. So there's a lot to be said about something that's just, a straight bourbon or whiskey or rye finished in an X cask, but these are micro blends that we are vatting and then using our either neutral oak or certain casks as holding vessels. And so it's really interesting to taste something when it's a cognac finish versus a Sauterne versus a Madeira. So we're really excited about that. Bourbon private release is also something within our single barrel program that we are about to release in the next couple of months. So those will be blends of straight bourbons. And I haven't tasted them yet, but I'm really excited about them. They'll be very limited at first, but hopefully there will be more next year. But yeah, besides that, Armida, Bourbon 26, Whiskey private release, Bourbon private release the Barrell Craft Spirits line. I think I have covered all of the new products for the rest of the year, but I could be missing something, although I don't think I am. Does anyone have any questions? I'm just getting into Amari. Can you say which one it is? All right, sorry, just catching up on all the questions here. It's so funny that you actually, so Dan, which one is Dan? Oh, there you are, hi. We actually just had a call yesterday with the owner of St. Agrestis. I'm not sure if you know the brand. Perfect. So he kind of gave us the rundown of Amari, the category as a whole, his company, how he's been kind of working with Green Hook Gin, and how he's been kind of shape-shifting the domestic Amari category. There we go. Yeah, that's the new packaging for St. Agrestis. So we are coming out with a whiskey private release that will be finished in the St. Agrestis casks, which we're really, really excited about. It's funny, Jessica in Texas, the brand development manager, she tasted it last night for the first time, and it's not quite finished and ready to be bottled yet. Hopefully the next couple of weeks it will be bottled, but we're really excited about this one. I think it's fun to talk about finished things, but when you're working with someone in the industry, especially Louis, who's the owner of St. Agrestis, when you're working with someone that you already know and has an amazing product, I think it just makes the finished product that much more special. And let's just say, I hope that there's more St. Agrestis finished things to go around in the future. But that's the Amari supplier that we actually work with. Let's see. He replied to my Instagram at 4 a.m.
So Eva, it's them and also Sicilian Amaro as well.
Oh yeah, Sicilian Amaro. Yeah, I forgot about those. Yes. Yep. So a lot of the time, there are certain, suppliers or casks that we can't necessarily name the producer on our labels, but some of the times when it's Louis from St. Agrestis, or I think we're working with a California winery, we also list Dunn on our Dovetail labels. So it is kind of a mix of listing the producers versus not listing the producers. So we're really excited about that, St. Agrestis. All right, let's see. I hope I answered everyone's questions, just kind of fielding them as they come in.
There was one from George, Eva, about do you handle all the secondary barrel finishing, or has some come to you already having spent time in secondary casks?
Yeah, so I know Will has a better understanding of like what kind of comes in and comes out of the barrel world. We do, have a few different warehouses. Our facility in Kentucky is just kind of everything goes in and out. But I know that we work with 68 different distilleries. And a lot of the times I know that, people are calling Joe and Trip and Will to say, hey, I just got my hands on all of this Madeira finished 4-year-old Indiana juice for a great price. Would you like some? So I'm sure Will can shed some light on that, but there's definitely a lot of times that we've been presented with finished products. I think for the most part, we don't necessarily integrate those finished products into our core line. We do everything ourselves. Am I right on that, Will? We don't really have much that has already been finished.
It is rare that we have something that we've acquired that's been finished, unless it's like a secondary, like a double oaking kind of situation, which often we will work with someone who didn't distill the thing themselves. They bought it from someone else, so they may have bought it in tote and then rebarreled it themselves and then shipped it to us back in. There's some weird situations that have happened with that. Every once in a while, there will be a small, usually like very local, tourism-driven producer that bit off more than they could chew with something they were trying to do. And so we'll wind up with like one or two raspberry brandy finished bourbons or something that came from some random place in New Hampshire or Vermont, or but it's never in bulk. It's usually like one or two things that someone really needed cash flow, and we have a bit of a reputation now as being like easy to work with like, do you have a cool random thing? Like, this company is interested. For the most part, we are purchasing whiskey that is either still in the barrels that it was originally entered into, or was aged, done and used barrels and has been redistributed, so the barrels are topped off and we do the finishing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So there isn't a definite answer to that, but we'll taste anything. Like if someone has something that they are interested in trading or selling and it fits into our price point and our product mix, we want to have just like the most extensive spice box of things to blend with as possible.
Mhm.
But we're a little bit conceited in that we think we can do it better than other people can, and so we usually buy the base and make it ourselves.
I think a lot of the time when someone, and Will, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if someone comes to us with a proposition of, I have, 57 raspberry brandy finished things, would you like them? There's almost always a clue that something went wrong, and then this is being filtered through a broker and then kind of shifted around. But there's a lot that kind of is moved within the broker world and on, in the back scenes that we don't necessarily see. Dan had mentioned that he tried a 7-year pick, which I'm going to guess is an Indiana rye pick. There we go. That's great. Yeah, we've been doing Indiana rye picks. I think for about 6 or 7 months, right when the pandemic started, is when we started releasing Indiana rye picks. And I think that these specific barrels. So Joe and Tripp taste everything before buying anything. They make sure that everything comes in and is usually good ingredients to blend with. And the ones that stand out are in balance on their own. They get kind of shifted to our single barrel program. And so that's where I've kind of had this newfound love of Indiana rye, just rye category in general. There's a bad rap with rye as a whole, but Indiana rye it tends to be very dill focused and just very abrasive, very spicy. And I think that these ryes are so delicious. They're not so dill and pickly. There's a floral, there's a tobacco note, there's a chocolate note that I get on almost all of them that just really bring out the category in general. So I'm glad that you got a bottle, Dan. It's delicious. I have a lot of rye that I go through at home. All right, let's see. I think I'm almost all caught up. If anyone doesn't have any other questions, I'll put my email in here, please.
I have a question real quick. So I have the number of the barrel for the private Montgomery County barrel. If I gave you that number, are you able to provide information about it? Or is that something you could send out?
So what is the barrel number? So typically with all of our barrels, it's tough to get into very small details. I can give you the yield, I can give you the proof, the age, the origination of the barrel, but it's tough to kind of hone in on other specifics of it.
Sure.
But yeah, please give me the barrel number and I can kind of.
So Montgomery County did a private barrel and it is E539. And there were only 128 bottles of it, according to the label.
So E539, that was part of our 14-year-old Tennessee bourbon lot that we bought. I want to say about a year ago is when we had the E-release.
We bottled it a year ago, not
yeah, so it was bottled. Yep. And so they're all 14-year-old Tennessee bourbons. So that's that specific barrel.
I think also
I'm sorry.
The E series, if I'm remembering correctly, was like bottled
Mm-hmm.
In the fall of last year.
I think so.
And what?
I think so.
Yeah. What is kind of unique about that, I don't want to say unique about that, but what is interesting about fall dumps is the barrels were sitting in the hottest time of the year right before they were dumped, which is counterintuitive. You would think something that had just been sitting in a lot of heat would be oakier and more powerful, but actually what happens is the heat puts the barrel in what we call pull, which means it's expanding, it's pushing ethanol, especially like alcohol vapor, into the wood and out of the wood. And it's not pushing it back into the barrel. And so fall dump barrels are often a little bit more nuanced and a little bit lower in their proof and a little bit less oaky. Like end of winter, so like February dump barrels are usually like the oakiest, most astringent barrels. And so the E series and then the K series and the G series were all the same lot of barrels that had been identified, but the E series were dumped in the fall, and I think the K series were dumped in December, and the G series were dumped at the end of January. And so even though every one is not only like its own series, if you were to sort of average out the oakiness and the proofs and the assertiveness, it's like the E's are the softest and the K's are the middle and the G's are like the roughest. Usually what we find is it's the rough ones from the fall dumps that are the best, and it's the soft ones from the winter dumps that are the best. But that's not a rule. It's just a trend. It's like the things that manage to keep their identity against the forces of nature seem to like have the most exciting identity. But yeah, so that's not about the barrel, but is definitely about the set of bottlings, the E series is what we call them.
Stacey, I hope that helps you.
Yes, it does. I was just trying to push, promote the private barrel that Montgomery County brought in.
That's great.
So
Yeah.
everyone, if you have interest in it, definitely check the search portal that Melissa put in the chat and see where you can find it.
So I will say this has been outstanding. Eva, amazing job. And then just huge shout out, Will, Stephanie, the entire Barrel team, Stacy. We are sending you virtual cheers as our thank you. And then everyone, all of our attendees on the call, thank you so much for joining. And we hope to see you at another virtual seminar soon. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good night.